Welcome to Craft Chat Chronicles, the go-to podcast for tips on crafting best-selling fiction. Here at Craft Chat Chronicles, we bring you expert interviews, insights, and tips on writing, publishing, and marketing. Join the conversation and embark on a new chapter in your writing journey. For workshops, show notes, and more information, visit jdmyall.com. That's jdmyall.com.
In Season 3, Episode 11 of Craft Chat Chronicles, we talk to New York Times best-selling author Alan Gratz. Alan has given us titles like Refugee and Resist. He's written tons of books for Scholastic and other publishers, and he's generous with his knowledge on writing craft and what it takes to hook readers from the start and keep them all the way through. Season 3, Episode 11 of Craft Chat Chronicles. Let's get chatty. So tell me about your publishing journey. How did you find your agent?
So I began, my first book came out in 2006, but I sold it in 2003, the end of 2002, beginning of 2003, and I was unagented. This was back in the era when you could send stuff in through the slush pile. Maybe you still can, but I know that things have changed a lot. I was sending novels out into editorial slush piles, and it was the first book I sold was the third book that I had written and submitted to publishers. The first two never got published. The third book became my first published book. That book was Samurai Shortstop, and it was still, I think, 15 different publishers said no before the 16th said yes. And then once I got that offer, I had a lot of friends that I had made who were published authors by going to conferences and conventions and things. And they said, okay, now go get an agent. And so I basically cold called a few agents and said, I have a book that I've got an offer from Dial, from an imprint at Penguin, and would you represent me? And that's how I found my very first agent. It's not the way you do things. It's not the way I think you're supposed to do things. It's certainly not the way I recommend people do things now. But it was a little bit of a different time. And so I've been with 2 or 3 different agents since then. And so the person that I'm with now was not that original person who picked me up. I'm now with Holly Root of Root Literary, and she's terrific and love her. And but that's how I got started, was sending things into editors and getting lots and lots of rejections. This was, I guess the Harry Potter era had begun in Kidlit, but it hadn't really taken hold to like that era of fantasy, Kidlit fantasy really saw the explosion in the number of agents who were willing to take on Kidlit. And at the time when I was first submitting my books, there were maybe 6 people who admitted in the Writer's Digest big fat book that you used to get, and they would say that I also do children's books. So once I had exhausted like all 6 of those, I was submitting to editors. And now, of course, it's a whole different landscape. There are dozens and dozens of terrific agents who are handling Kidlit, and many of whom that's all they do. So it's just a different landscape now. I feel like an old man of Kidlit publishing, 20 books on.
That's a beautiful thing. How long have you been with Holly Root?
She and I have been working together since, when was that? Maybe 2015 or 2016, somewhere in there. Banned This Book, which we're going to talk about, and book banning was one of my first book deals I did with her, through her. And I think that book came out in 2017.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. Looking back, what do you think you did right that helped you become the published author that you are today?
I went to a lot of conferences and read a lot of books about how to be professional. And, Writer's Digest has a lot of resources. I joined SCBWI, the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, and went to those conferences. I tried to find out how to be professional. And I learned how to write a query letter. I learned how to write a first 30 that would grab somebody's attention. And I learned to finish stuff. That was a big thing. A lot of people aspire to be writers and have a lot of half-finished books in their computer. And that was me for a long time. And finally, I realized if I'm going to be serious about this and get published, I actually have to commit to something, finish it, run it by friends and other readers who can help me, and then revise it. That was another thing. I wasn't revising my own work for about 10 years after college. I would just be done and say, great, it's finished. And, then I was actually at an SCBWI conference where I heard Linda Sue Park speak. And Linda Sue Park won the Newbery Medal for A Single Shard and has a lot of terrific historical and contemporary kids books. And she was talking with her editor on the panel. And they were talking about how they went through, I don't know, something like 100 different edits on a book, and by the time it was at the end, it was very specific stuff, but she had 100 different files in the folder on her computer for the different revisions they had done. And I was like, I revised mine once before I sent it out. And it really was very eye-opening to me that if I was going to be a published author and build a career, that one of the things I was going to have to do was actually really pay attention to revision, to work really hard after the first draft was done to get it to a place where it was publishable.
I love that.
I persevered. I didn't quit. Rejection is a part of the business. And a lot of people are going to tell you no at every step of the way. And you have to believe that you have a story that you want to tell and a voice that needs to be heard. And you have to keep it up. You can't have just one idea, because if nobody wants it, you go to the next one. And of course, another thing that has changed so much about the landscape of publishing is indie publishing and self-publishing. If that had been around when I was starting out 20 years ago, I might have taken some of the things that were turned down traditionally and tried to publish them indie publishing or self-publishing. It's just a whole different landscape. And it's something I don't know much about now because I have a successful traditionally published career, but I know people are doing great things there too. But regardless of whether you're trad publishing or whether you're indie publishing, I think the big thing is to keep producing work, to not produce one thing and then try to send it out for 10 years. Or don't keep revising something based on other people's feedback for 10 years. You've got to make it, revise it, try it out. And if it doesn't float, try something new. If you want to build a long-term career in publishing.
Hi, my name is Kaya Freitz, and I'm currently in the studio recording Heart's Gambit by J.D. Mayall. Chapter 1. Emma Baldwin. Harlem, 1943. When the moonlight hits the circus tents, they bleed. Ruby drops turn to rose petals before raining down on the audience. A symbol. That's all anybody wants. Something that feels bigger than them, no matter the city, no matter the time. Ma always said this when we were fortifying the fabric together, using our hands to imbue the crimson silk with our gifts. Something magical, something beautiful. And if we remind them that we're the best black circus on the circuit in the process, what's the harm? Oohs and ahs ripple as the crowd begins to file into the big top. They settle in their seats and prepare for the show as that bloody rain begins. Find Heart's Gambit wherever you get your audiobooks.
I love that. Out of curiosity, how does your agent-author relationship work with Holly? Like, do you show her your ideas and you guys pick what she thinks will work, or do you give her proposals, or do you write full manuscripts? How do you guys decide what's going to be next?
At this point, my relationship with her is pretty easy. Because I've published my last 10 or so books with Scholastic, and really enjoy that partnership. we're not even shopping my next novel. Like whatever I'm writing next, the assumption is that Scholastic is going to want it. And so what I'll do is I'll go to Holly and say, okay, the current contract we have is running out. Here's the next book I'd like to write. But take this idea to Scholastic and see if they're interested. And let's see if we can get, usually I've had a multi-book deal where I'm doing 2, 3, and the last contract was 4 books. And we don't know what those next books are. I don't write series. I write standalones now. And so my publisher and I don't know what my third book on a contract is going to be, except that it's probably going to be a historical thriller or a contemporary thriller, but it's going to be a middle grade thriller. And that has some sort of a social justice angle to it. That's another thing that I've tried to work into all of my recent books. So for me, I go to Holly and just say, hey, I just need your help to get this contract done. And she doesn't see my first drafts at this point, but she doesn't really look at the revisions. She'll see the back and forth. We copy her, my editor and I copy her on everything, and she'll email me and say, "Do I need to read this one?" I'm like, "No, not yet. It's got another couple of revisions. Don't worry about it yet." But she always reads them. But she always, I always say, don't bother with draft 3 if there's going to be 7 drafts. But when I started working with her, I did have a book, Ban This Book, that Scholastic wasn't as interested in because it didn't fit the other kind of books I'd been doing with Scholastic. They liked the book, but at the time I was really well known for writing World War II thrillers, and they were afraid that it would take me that my audience wouldn't be as receptive to it and that it would take me farther away from where I was being successful. I still liked the book. I had written it in its entirety because it was kind of a side project. It wasn't something I had sold to a publisher. And so in a situation like that, Holly will read the book. She'll talk to me about whatever changes I need to make that she advises. After it goes through a little bit of revision, then we talk about places that she thinks it would make a good home for it and sends it out. I remember during that process, we had a couple of good bites, but they had other books about book banning in the works for middle grade readers, and they didn't want to double up. They didn't want to compete with their own books. So some places that book might have found a home took a pass, not because of the book necessarily, but because they already had something else that they were working on. I think right around the same time, Chris Grabenstein was working on one of his Limoncello books, and it was about, like, it had as a theme book banning in it. And that publisher was like, "Oh, we love this, but we're doing Chris's book and it would compete with it." So it found a home at Tor's middle grade imprint at the time, Starscape, where I'd already published a couple of things with them. But that's usually what happens if I have something that's not like a handed off to Scholastic kind of thing. She and I will talk about where it might work best and be best published. And then she does all the submitting and sends me feedback, whether it's a rejection or a success. I have tried writing a few things on the side outside of the books that I write for Scholastic, and that's kind of the process with them. But for those, I generally finish them first and take them to her to make sure that I'm committed enough to the project to actually see it through, because the Scholastic deadlines are fast and furious.
I love that. What was your biggest surprises or learning experiences about or in the industry?
So initially, I was very happy to get the phone call where somebody offered me a book deal, and I was like, "Yeah, let's do it," right on the phone. And that's not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to say, "That sounds like a great offer. Let me get back to you." Of course, that's when you're talking to an editor. If you're working with an agent already, she's going to call you up and say, "I have an offer," and you can discuss it on the phone right there. But I was so eager to have a book deal. I was like, "Heck yeah, let's do it." And then I went to find an agent, and they're like, "Did you say yes on the phone?" And I was like, "Well, yeah." So it limited some of the things that they could negotiate. But what else do I wish I had learned? So at the beginning of my career, I was really lucky enough to be able to write a lot of different genres. At the beginning of my career, I wrote historical fiction. I wrote contemporary fiction. I wrote mysteries. I wrote fantasies. Penguin let me kind of feel my way into, they just said, if it's a good book, we'll do it. And that worked, but it was hard to build sort of a brand identity. And I know that brand is a dirty word to a lot of creatives who just want to to do whatever art thing, follow the art. And I get that. I totally get that. And I never write anything that I don't want to write. I never write anything for the market that wasn't something that I was passionate about. That is a huge mistake. Like the book won't be good. You'll have a terrible time. It won't sell. Like I only write books that I want to write and that I'm excited about. But I wish that I had been able to think more. I wish I'd known more at the beginning that building a brand around the kind of books that you write is a really effective way to build a readership. And like I think that people were picking up my early books because they were interested in that particular topic. Now, with my black and white and red books from Scholastic, I think it doesn't matter what the topic is. I think my readers are picking up because my name is on it. And that's a very different thing as an author. If you can get to a place where they're picking up your book because of who you are, and they're like, well, I've read books by him before. I know I'm going to get a particular kind of experience out of it, an experience I love. That's where you really want to be. And so if there's a way to build a brand for yourself early on, and it doesn't have to be narrow. You don't have to say like, I'm only going to write World War II thrillers, because that's a nice niche, but it's really hard to keep that going. But saying like, I'm going to write middle grade thrillers set in any time and any place is a lot more freeing, but still is a brand. It still is a brand. Like people know that when they pick my books up, they're going to be page turners. They know that when they pick them up, I'm going to get right to the story right away, that there's going to be cliffhangery chapters and things that draw the reader forward, that the books aren't going to be super long. There's going to be, like an expected amount of time that it will take to read it, which when you're a kid, I mean, I don't know if you were like this when you were a kid, but, most kids I know, they look at a doorstopper and they're like, no, I think I'll pass on the 600-page book and go for the one that's 250. There are exceptions, obviously, and there are kids who will read anything that's that big. But there's a lot of reluctant readers or out there who pick my books up because they know it will be a quick read and that it's something that they can actually make it through. So I've begun to think about all these different things that I'm known for, and make sure that each of my projects fits within that expectation. And that's what I consider to be my brand. Not only do the covers and the books look alike, but when you pick them up and read them, you're going to have an experience that you anticipated, that you expected, and that you love. So if I could go back in time and tell my younger self what to do, I would say, try to build a brand as early as you can. I would also say, start writing World War II thrillers as early as you can. But that's something that you can't know what's gonna click with kids or your audience, whoever your audience is. But definitely trying to decide who you are as a writer and what you're trying to say as a writer and what you're trying to accomplish. And sometimes that may just be sheer entertainment, and you're just writing things that are just going to be like the best, most awesome escapist read possible. And that's terrific. Be known for that. Maybe you're going to write books like mine that always have a social justice angle to them, so that is always included. And a teacher, for example, can know that if she puts that book into a kid's hands, that's going to be an element of it as well, or that she may be able to use it in the classroom to teach larger stuff. And that the book is going to be unputdownable. But whatever your brand is, I was tutoring a young writer from Kentucky a few years back. And I said, why do you want to write? What kind of stories do you want to tell? And she said, I want to show people that people from Appalachia aren't all rubes, that we aren't all the hillbilly stereotype. And I was like, great. Like, you know what your vision is. Now, every story you tell, make sure that that's a part of it. And there's a myriad of stories that she could tell with that goal, right? It doesn't limit her to genre. It doesn't limit her to time period. It doesn't limit her to what kind of character she writes about. But knowing why you write and having a goal with that is I think a terrific way to brand yourself, even if you don't tell anybody else you have a brand.
I love that. I absolutely love that. What makes a good thriller?
I've thought a lot about this, what makes a good thriller. I think short chapters, even for adults. I think if you pick up any James Patterson novel or any of the folks who write like him, you'll see short chapters. I think you will see action that is almost nonstop. You do have to have moments where your characters slow down and take a breath and reevaluate and analyze. But there's not a lot of, how do I want to put it? There's not a lot of looking backwards in the moment. There's a lot of just surviving and moving forward in a thriller. You may have time for reflection is the word I want. There's not a lot of time for reflection in a thriller in the middle of it. But what you want is for the end of it to when it wraps up, then the characters can reflect on what happened. But in the moment, there's a lot of moving forward and just responding and reacting. I heard somebody say once that a good thriller is one where the hero of your story learns what the problem is very early on and then spends the rest of the book trying to fix it. And whereas a mystery is, something mysterious has happened, somebody's been murdered or a gem has been stolen or something, and then you spend the rest of the time trying to figure out who done it. In a thriller, you know who did it, and you know who's going to do it. You know, like in The Day of the Jackal, that there is an assassin out there who is going to kill the president of France, and you have to stop it, right? And so a thriller needs to have, I think, clearly defined goal, a clearly defined goal at the beginning. I need to figure out X, I need to stop Y, I need to do Z, and that the whole rest of the book is the character following that. Now, there may be twists and turns that take them off of that path and that send them on in a new direction, and you need to have that. But they need to have an initial goal right from the start. Everybody else at my office has been killed while I was out to lunch, and now I'm on the run, and I have to figure out why they targeted my office and why they're coming after me. So for me, a good thriller is one where I tell my young readers right off the bat, this is what this story is going to be about. And then my main character has to keep confronting that problem all the way through the story until they solve that problem. And it has to be a fast read, super high pace, cliffhangery chapters, as I've said before, really work in this kind of thing to keep pulling you forward, and not a lot of reflection, like I said.
Generally, what page does the action kick off in a thriller? Is it like a page 1 thing, a page 5?
If you can do it on page 1, it's awesome. But the problem with that is you usually don't know your character enough to care. So I always say by the end of the first chapter. Like, I really want to have a first chapter where we get to know my main character just a little bit. We get to know where we are and what's going on in the world. But then I love to get to that inciting incident, as people often call it, their catalyst, by the end of the first chapter. I learned a long time ago that as a person who writes for kids, I think I have one of the most demanding audiences out there. No kid ever said, well, this book is really boring, but it got a great review in the New York Times, so I think I'm going to give it another 100 pages, right? Every kid has got video games that they want to play. They want to play outside. They've got other things to do besides read your book. 1,000 other things calling for their attention, their phones, their computers, their TVs. And I love all those things. I am not a kill your TV kind of guy. I just realized long ago that I have to compete with those things. And that means that I have to use some of the same techniques. I use screenwriting books to write my stories, to help outline my stories. I watch television episodes and with the clicker in hand and pause them after every scene to write down what happened in that scene and how long it took, so that I can analyze how television is feeding us stories, to think about how I can do that in my own books. It doesn't work exactly. It's apples and oranges, but you've got to understand how other stories are being fed to people on television and in film. And now people are writing books that you can read on your phone, and they're designed to be short chapters and brief scenes where you're not lost in the middle of a long chapter scrolling through with your thumb on the bus. So for me, I realized with kids that I need to get to the story really, really quickly. I've got to be clear what the goals of the main character are, and I need to get to those as early as possible, by the end of the first chapter, if possible. Sometimes I got to go 2 chapters in. Sometimes I got to go 3, and it just kills me. And I'm really, really want to get on with it. I used to, when I started my career 20 years ago, tried to make sure that the inciting incident happened by page 30. Now I'm trying to make sure it happens by page 5 or 7. And I just think it's both me learning more about how to write thrillers, but it's also, I think, just how we are changing as a society and demanding our speed in our stories. If you watch a detective show from the 1970s, there are long sequences of people driving in cars just to get to where they're going. And it is boring. It is super boring. And if you watch a modern television show, the 2 cops will be in the police station and they'll say, hey, let's go interview this person. And then they cut and they are at the door of the person and they are asking that person questions. There's no driving. We don't care how they got there. We don't know. They might as well have teleported there for all we know. We never need to see it. We don't need to know it. And I think that I think thrillers need to keep that in mind in books. I think it was Elmore Leonard who said, all those boring parts in a book that you skip, don't write those. And I try to remember that. Don't write the boring parts. Get to the good stuff as soon as possible. And kids are a terrific audience for me for that. If they don't like where a book is going by page 5, they will put it down and never come back. And so it's my job to make sure they don't put it down.
I love that. You mentioned that you refer to some screenwriting books to help you. What screenwriting books do you refer to?
My biggest and best one is the old Save the Cat by Blake Snyder. That's my absolute favorite. After I read that book, I never viewed movies and any kind of story, honestly, but movies for sure, the same way. I'm also a fan of, I think it's Christopher Vogler who wrote The Hero's Journey for Writers. And the story goes that he was working as a story consultant at Disney. And he was like, do you guys know The Hero's Journey? And they were like, no. And so he wrote up a memo, like a 9-page memo about the hero's journey, and handed it to them. And they were like, this is gold. And apparently, from what I understand, they used it to write The Lion King and everything ever since then. And like this may be apocryphal, but somebody told me that when they got this 9-page memo and they read it, they kept locking it away in a vault, like in a safe. They didn't want anybody else to see it. And he's like, guys, this is the hero's journey. It's Star Wars, I'm not the first. It's Joseph Campbell. You can go to the library and check this out. But he ended up writing a book. I believe it's called the Hero's Journey for Writers. And I love that. It's a much more in-depth book into all of the beats and tropes of the hero's journey, and then translating them for contemporary storytelling. And then, in college, I was brought up on Sid Field's screenplay. I mean, that was one of the OG books that I read on story structure, and that's the old just 3-act structure. Blake Snyder and others have taken it and broken it down even farther, so that you can see the different individual beats in something and the themes that you often get at. The all is lost moment, the whiff of death, the turning points throughout a story. The point of the decision to act. All these kind of beats that I really think about when I'm creating a story. Oftentimes those beats change in revision, because as you revise a book and you rework your story, you realize that some parts of it need to change. Blake Snyder, when he wrote that Save the Cat book, was like, on page 10, this happens of your screenplay, and on page 25, this happens. And look, you can extrapolate for a novel, but it's really hard for those things to hit on exactly those pages. But if you use it as a guideline, boy, you can help build a strong story to start. Or if you don't like using structures like that to outline, if you're a pantser and you just want to sit down and go, write your book, but then go back to it in the first revision and compare it to some of these structures. And you can see in Ban This Book, when I wrote my first 2 or 3 drafts, I shared them with other people, other writers I knew, and something wasn't working right at the end of it. And one writer I knew, Carrie Ryan, read it, and she says, oh, you're missing an all is lost moment. They move right from planning the big third act thing that they do to doing it. And there's challenges there, but there's no all is lost moment. And I was like, oh gosh, you're right. And so I added in a beat where they make all these plans and they do a whole lot of prep work. And then the main character's little sister accidentally wrecks it, just like totally shreds it, like literally takes a big stack of paper and shreds it up to make fake hay for her toy horses. And like, then they have to scramble, and it changed. It created that, oh no, we're done. Oh no moment, that all is lost moment. And it helped me make a more dynamic climax to the book as they have to scramble to then rework their big plans. And so like I had already written the book by that point. I had just failed to put in one of these key beats that we as savvy story consumers, all of us who read, who watch movies, who watch television, even if we don't know the names of them, even if we don't know how to structure a story, we're so brought up on stories that we know when something's missing. And I think that's where books like Save the Cat or The Hero's Journey for writers can really come in very helpful.
Love that. Love that. What are the core elements of a good first page?
I think you got to get the main character and their name on the first page, and we need to start seeing and hearing them from page one. I get really frustrated when I pick up a book and it's all the weather or the landscape. I'm a big Star Trek fan, and I've read a lot of Star Trek novels, and it's super like I never liked it when we started on an alien planet and it wasn't like my crew that I picked up the book to read. Like, the reader has particular expectations when they pick up a book. And if the back cover says, you're going to get Kirk and Spock on an adventure, or your main character says, this housewife is going to solve a murder, don't start somewhere else. Like, give me that character on page one. And there's always time to back up. There's always time to flash back. There's always time to put something else in. But I think a lot of, and this is an old Blake Snyder term, the promise of the premise. I want some of the promise of the premise on page one. And I think a little spectacle is great if you can do it, so that you hook your reader in from the first moment. At the same time, I have things that I don't want to do on page one. I do not want to introduce 10 characters on page one. No. Like, it has to be one, maybe two characters that you introduce on page one, because nobody wants to pick up a book and have to remember 10 names from page one. You've got to slowly introduce those things. So where we are, what's going on in this moment. You don't even have to give me the context. I'm working on a book right now that's about, it's a heist story set at the Berlin Olympics in 1936. And I have my main character walking out of that tunnel into the stadium with all the cheering fans with the American team, and Jesse Owens is right next to her, and like the Hitler's up in the box watching over them. We get the feeling of where we are, but I don't need to tell you right now that we're not at war yet. I will tell you that later. I don't need to tell you right now what event she's in. I can tell you that later. I just need to set a really intriguing setting and put my main character in it and have them responding and thinking and being who they are in that moment. I've seen a lot of books where they start out with like a bang, or a dragon eats somebody in the first line or something. And that's great, but we all haven't had time to care about the main character. And a story has to build. And if you start with a big bang, where do you go from there? Then is it all a letdown until the very end? Like, that's also tricky. So I think the promise of the premise on page one, not too many characters, focusing though on the main character. That's one of my pet peeves, is when I pick up a book and the main character isn't on the first page or isn't even in the first chapter. Gosh, I want to get to them, and I want to start identifying with them from page one.
So you're not a Harry Potter fan, I take it.
I do not like the first chapter of Harry Potter. I was a huge Harry Potter fan when those books came out. I loved reading them. I have read them multiple times, read them to my own kid. Things are different now, obviously. But I have taught many classes on writing novels. And I tell people, do not use the first Harry Potter novel as an example. Do not. I don't like that it starts without, it's not Harry whose point of view, and Harry's a baby, like, and it's on Privet Drive, like it's this mysterious, like, if I'm remembering correctly, it's like Hagrid on the motorcycle with the baby, and McGonagall's there as a cat. There's so many characters that we're not going to meet again until he goes to school, because we're going to be with the Dursleys for a little while. And he's a baby. Like, no, it's not my favorite opening. I'll tell you another book that's terrific that has a bad first chapter. Maybe I shouldn't say this. The Ranger's Apprentice is another great book for young readers that has a terrible first chapter. I don't know what editor allowed this, but the whole first chapter is backstory. It's just like, here's the history of this world. And it's like, oh my gosh, what seventh grader is going to read this? Then you get to the second chapter, and the main character is climbing the outside of a building to spy on some adults who are getting ready to go on a big mission. That's awesome. That's a terrific first chapter. Why couldn't you start there and then drop in all that backstory stuff later on? I don't like prologues. Listen, I'll rant and rave. I'll get on my soapbox. I don't like prologues. I don't like starting with the character being born. And I have some very favorite books that I've read that do this. And I think it's a bad idea, especially for aspiring writers. You can maybe get away with that if you have 10 books out, because your reader will know to hang with you. And look, I know J.K. Rowling was unknown when that first book came out, but I think it breaks a lot of the rules. And I think that the best way to get published is to follow the rules as much as possible your first time out. Like, it's very rare that a book that breaks the rules, it becomes your first sale, and that it becomes a breakout. Even 3 or 4 books into my career, I tried writing a book all in second person, and it still got no traction. Nobody wanted it. I'd had 2 or 3 books out, and they were like, no, we're not doing a book in second person for you. Like, maybe now that I've been on the New York Times bestseller list and I have 20 books out, if I said, I'm going to write a book in second person, they might be like, go for it. But 4 books in, they were like, oh, no. So
and you're right.
No, yeah, go ahead.
I was just going to say, you're right. It takes an established author with an audience
I think so.
To get away with that. 'Cause, for example, I love Stephen King, but I thought Fairy Tale took too long. I wanted the fairy tale, and I couldn't wait for him to get in that shed and go where we wanted to go.
Right.
And that was what I was here for. Anyone else?
You know, as a Stephen King fan, that you're going to get it.
Yeah.
And so you hang with it.
Right. Because it was Stephen, I kept going. But anybody else, I would have put the book down, because I wouldn't have known that I would get the payoff I wanted.
That's what I'm saying. And so for the aspiring writers out there, it's really important to write the strongest first book that you can. And generally that means not breaking the rules. Doing something really creative within the rules is awesome. I just read Everybody in My Family is a Murderer, and it's super clever and it's very fun. And it very much plays by the rules. In fact, it lists the rules at the beginning of the book and then finds ways to have fun with those along the way. And so know the rules before you get into the rules of whatever genre you're writing, and obey them. You know, nobody wants your romance novel where there's not a happily ever after. Nobody wants that. So like know what the tropes are, and know what the unwritten rules are. Sometimes they're actually written, and do those and have fun within them with your early books. And then save that great idea that you've got for a mind-breaking novel for later on, when you've got an audience who will hang with you.
Very true, very true. How do you avoid the saggy middle? So
for me, a big breakthrough, and I wish I knew a book or something to recommend for this, but it's kind of just wisdom passed along by other authors. So I don't know if you've heard of the 8 block. Have you heard people talk about an 8 block in terms of writing? Okay. I don't. I used to have. I just moved to Portland like in April, and so I don't have my big board behind me, but I have a big board in my office that is a big rectangle that's squared off into 8 different blocks, and each of these blocks is a discrete section of my book. So the first 2, do I have? You know what? I break down my book into 8 different sections. And each of these sections, I have then assigned different parts of different, like when I use Blake Snyder's Save the Cat, I assign different parts of his Save the Cat to these different 8 blocks. So the first block is the introduction, where we meet the main character and see the ordinary world. The line between the first and second block that come on top of each other in a column is where the instigating moment happens, the catalyst happens, the inciting incident. And the main character has a choice to make. Do I go off on the adventure or do I stay home? Luke Skywalker finds out from Obi-Wan Kenobi that that he needs to go save a princess. And will I leave? And then there's a decision to be made. And the decision to act is that next block. And then at the bottom of that, the very bottom of this first column, that's when the main character decides, I'm going to go after the adventure. And when they move from that, they move into the second act. And for me, the second act is the 4 middle blocks. So I've got the blocks go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So there's 8 blocks. It's like a rectangle, and you divide it long ways in half, and then so you've got 4 columns of 2 blocks each. And the first 2 blocks are the first act. The next 4 in the middle are the second act. And the way that I make sure I don't have a saggy middle is I make sure that I think about my second act as 4 different sections, so that something interesting and exciting happens in each of those 4 sections. Because a lot of times people won't break up that big act 2. They'll just get into it and start writing. But I have to say, like, okay, borrowing from Blake Snyder again, block 3 is the fun and games moment. This is where we have the movie poster. If you're reading Wizard of Oz, block 3 is Dorothy's first time exploring Oz. She's walking down that yellow brick road. This is where Luke goes off into space and sees aliens and all kinds of weird stuff for the first time, right? He's not on Tatooine anymore. Then that next block down, I think of as like the X Games, and something more extreme happens. And then block 5 is the bad guys close in, and block 6 is all is lost, and block 7 is the climax. But now we're into Act 3. So that middle part, though, to get back to your question, Act 2 for me is twice as long as Act 1, and it's twice as long as Act 2. It's like Act 2 itself is if you added the material in Act 1 and Act 3 together. So you've got a long middle part of your story. And what I want to do is make sure that there's always that I break it down into 4 different pieces. And I think about those as set pieces, like theater, like people do in movies. This set piece is going to be where they are escaping from this building. And this set piece is going to be where they're now they are in a helicopter, and the helicopter is low on fuel and has a bullet hole in it. It's trying, and they have to make sure it doesn't crash. And here they crash land, and now they're being chased on the ground by FBI agents. And now here in the all is lost moment, the main character's mentor has been killed, and they have to go alone into the third act. So for me, and this is a very complicated answer, I know, I'm sorry, but the second act has to be broken up into pieces. If you don't break your second act up into pieces, you will find yourself writing one big, long slog, and that's where the middle of the book begins to sag. So I break my second act up into 4 pieces, and after the first 2 of those pieces, something really big happens. This is the midpoint of the book. And something really big has to happen. I always go back to movie examples or old literature examples, but like this is where Bilbo goes into the cave and comes out with the ring after having the contest with Gollum and almost being eaten by Gollum. There's this big moment in the middle, and he comes out, and now it's a race to the finish of the story. So for me, I always look for that. People will call it a tentpole moment. Some people call it the point of no return. But something massive happens right in the middle of the story. But in addition to that, I want to make sure that the build up to it has steps, and leaving that moment has more steps. So I break my second act into 4 pieces and make sure that something exciting happens in each of those pieces, and that the end of each of those pieces is a turning point for the story, with the biggest turning point of all those being the midpoint of the whole book.
Love that. And how do you craft a compelling end?
Oh, conclusions are hard. For me, I've started thinking about what's the one thing my main character would never do when the book begins, and then make them do it in the third act. That's maybe as simple an answer as I can give you. But if your character literally got burned, they were in a house fire and they were afraid of fire and they have avoided any kind of flames all their lives, then in the third act you got to put them in a burning building. And they got to do something heroic when that place is burning down. And that's the simplest example I can give. Establish right away from the first from your first chapters what your main character would never do. Sometimes it's a physical wound like that. Sometimes it's a mental wound, like in romance stories. This is, I'll never love again. I've been burned. Or I watched my mom get burned by a bad relationship, and I will never love again. And the finale of a romance is a character finding love. So what is it that your main character swears they will not ever do at the beginning? Make them do it in the finale. And I think that's a really satisfying thing to do and can help you come up with a good ending. If you know your main character is afraid of fire, you know what the setting has got to be for that climax. It's got to be in a burning building or something, a forest fire, out in California or Oregon or something, or if it's a romance, to take it away from like an epic story or a violent story. I will never love anybody ever again, and then how it ends. They're going to fall in love in that final act. They've been falling in love all through your book. They're going to accept that they have fallen in love, and they're going to commit to being in love in that final act. So for me, the climax has got to pay off something that you seed very early on. I also believe that a really good story should not end where you promised you'd begin in terms of the external plot. Let me say that better. In Star Wars, Luke goes off to save the princess. He does that by the middle of the movie. That's not the climax of the movie. He and Ben Kenobi save Princess Leia by the middle of the movie. The thing is that when they come out, she has the plans to the Death Star. And now the story shifts. And because you did that, now there's something new to do at the end. She says, well, great, now that you've saved me, we need you and all these other pilots to go destroy the Death Star. And that becomes the big third act. So I often tell aspiring writers, don't tell me from page 1 that the goal for your main character is to destroy the Death Star. They don't know that yet. They have goals along the way, and each time they achieve those goals, their larger goal changes. The biggest goal for Luke is to become a Jedi, is to accept his destiny as a hero and to embrace the Force. And that's what happens when he blows up the Death Star. He turns off the targeting computer and he uses the Force and he blows up the Death Star. And so the story is about him embracing the Force, and the external stuff we've done to get there is to build him up to where he has to use it to destroy the Death Star. So I always say, start off with a really clear goal in chapter 1 if you can, and then at each of the stages of the story as you move along, as those things are accomplished, keep changing that goal and keep raising the stakes. And so by the end, you are forcing your character to do one thing that they never thought they would do. Luke accepts himself as a hero and closes his eyes and shoots. And at the beginning, he would never have thought he was capable of that. Never believed he could do that. So make your character do something they would never do, and raise the stakes until there's no other choice but to do it.
I love that. Any advice for aspiring authors?
Read a lot. I run into so many aspiring authors who have great story ideas, but they're not reading what they want to write. I run into especially a lot of kids book authors, and I'll say, can name one book that's on the New York Times bestseller list for middle grade? And they can't do it. And look, that's fine. There are plenty of books that aren't going to ever hit the New York Times bestseller list. But I think you got to know what's big and what kids are reading right then, and decide: do you want to write that, or do you want to write something else and be okay with that? I know a lot of people who bristle about their low sales. And I'm like, but look at the book you wrote. It's not a big breakout commercial book. You can't, and the book they wrote is fine. It's great. It may even win an award of some kind, but you can't expect tremendous commercial results if you don't study the market. So I would say read a lot, read the kind of books that you want to write to help understand how those books are written, so that your book can be a part of that, like on that part of the shelf, but also so you can temper your expectations, so you can know what could potentially happen with your book. Are you writing a book that could break out? Then look at the book. Do you want your book to break out? Then look at the books that have broken out and study them. When I started writing my fantasy novel, I picked up the Rick Riordan books and I read them one straight through. And then I went back and reread them and broke them down chapter by chapter and tried to see where the story beats happened. I tried to see what he was doing with his characters. I tried to learn from somebody who was already successful, study the work of people who are already successful. I laugh with my agent all the time. I do not understand why there are not more authors doing exactly what I'm doing. Like a lot of times kids will say, what other books can I read? And I'm like, and I have a handful of authors that I point them to, but I don't know why there aren't 30 people doing what I'm doing. And maybe it's just because it's just what I'm most interested in and they're not. But it also could be that they're just not reading my books. I try to keep up with the Joneses and know what they're doing, and always be learning that kind of thing. So read what you want to write. I think that's a super basic, but a lot of people skip that step because they just want to jump into the writing.
Love it, love it, love it. How can people connect with you?
You can find me at my website, which is alangratz.com. And I have a Substack, which you can also subscribe to, that is an e-newsletter that will come out and tell you where I'm at and what I'm doing. I've really pulled back from social media. I'm on Twitter and I'm on Instagram. I can tell you those, but I really don't update those. I got off Twitter a long time ago. And Instagram just kind of feels like a time suck. I've got other reasons for being off of Twitter. You can probably guess that. But those are the places I would prefer people find me. So yes, it's alangratz.substack.com. So either alangratz.com or substack.alangratz.com. And I link to that on my webpage.
That wraps up today's Craft Chat Chronicles with JD Mayo. Thanks for joining us. If you liked the episode, please comment, subscribe, and share. For show notes, writing workshops, and tips, head to jdmayo.com. That's jdmayo.com. While you're there, join JD's mailing list for updates, giveaways, and more.
Are you struggling to keep your writing organized? Trust me, I've been there. I want to introduce you to Scrivener, the ultimate program for all writers. You can outline, draft, and even edit all in one place. Whether it's your next novel, screenplay, or even thesis, Scrivener helps you stay focused and finish strong. Scrivener adapts to your workflow. From your first draft to the final edit, it's a writer's secret weapon. Click on the link below and get started on your Scrivener writing journey today.